seconded by Councillor Charlotte. All in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to adoption of the minutes of the special council meeting of April 23rd. Someone may move that. Councillor Charlotte, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to business arising from the minutes of April 23rd. Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to announcements from the mayor. So just a couple things to bring up today. Definitely want to bring up again about COVID-19 testing. You're able to get the COVID-19 testing in the last couple of days. They said if you have one or two symptoms, you're able to phone the 814-2230 number at the local testing and talk to a nurse, and they'll set you up. So I just want people to be aware of that. Also, our Townley Roundly has officially started today. So for all of us in the South Revelstoke area, my friends and neighbors, the city has heard you. The start of the Roundabout project kicked off today with a resounding FUD. The detours around the new roundabout was not advertised well enough in advance or robust enough to make it simple to navigate. We've heard you, and we're making significant changes to the detour plans. More signage for both pedestrians and motor vehicles, reduced speed limit signs, and more barriers to the construction site. We will make every effort to keep everyone, residents, commuters, cyclists, and pedestrians safe for the duration of this project. This detour and construction site, like the COVID-19, is normal. The detour will become the new normal. And once the project's complete, the new roundabout will be a welcome improvement to this dangerous intersection. Please remember, this is a construction site. Please use the detours. Crossing the site is dangerous, and I repeat, dangerous. So please use the detours. Stay out of the way of the construction people. Remember, we're all in this together until September. Give yourselves more time to get where you're going. Respect your neighbors. Watch out for kids. Everyone who lives along the detour is not used to the amount of traffic now coming through our quiet streets. Lastly, we are here to listen to you. Let us know what you think we can do better. If you see something's unsafe, please let us know. In the following days, we'll set up an email address specifically for this project so that you can directly contact the project team. This information will be available on our website and social media in the coming days. So thanks for your patience. I live in this neighborhood and I'm seeing the increase in traffic. We have lots of children, so please keep safe, and we have the equivalent number of seniors as well. So just please pay attention. Thank you for that. I want to move on to our business, and we're going to go right into our departmental updates, starting with 11A, Parks and Recreation. There is a motion on the table dealing with the golf club. So is there a councilman that would like to put this on the agenda, please? Councillor Rind, I don't know if there's something over your computer camera, but we can barely see you. It's like we're looking through a mist.
Yeah, I can't really change that. It's just the sunlight coming in.
Okay, good.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So if you
I'll
want to
put the motion on the table.
Yep,
yeah.
Great.
That the Revelstoke Golf Club's decision to open the Revelstoke Golf Course be supported subject to the following. One, provision of a management plan that outlines measures consistent with best practices for golf courses that choose to open that will be implemented to address concerns with COVID-19. Two, restrict visitation to the golf course to locals only until the public health officer advises otherwise. And three, all other facilities to remain closed: clubhouse, restaurant, pro shop, driving range, and putting green.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Elliott, any discussion on the motion? Councillors, do you have any questions or concerns regarding this?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Councillor.
It mentions that all other facilities are to remain closed, but doesn't the golf course require it to process people's memberships and things like that?
Okay, so Ms. Donato, any comment on that, how they're going to process things without the pro shop being open? Please unmute your mic.
Sorry about that. Your worship, they have provided me with a management plan. They are going to encourage online bookings as much as they can. However, one component of the pro shop will be open where they will be able to take payment within the pro shop. They're going to limit the number of people allowed into the pro shop so that the staff feel comfortable about handling the transaction. So they'll have all the proper measures in place to deal with that. So the pro shop will in effect be open to take payment, not necessarily to sell merchandise.
Awesome. Great. Thanks. I appreciate that. Councillor Ryan, does that answer your question?
Yep, that's good.
Any further questions or concerns on the motion on the table? Councillor Charlotte.
I was just going to ask to find out what would be the protocols to rescind this if we need to because of changes to the emergency status or anything like that.
Ms. Donato, any comment?
Through your worship, so has the restrictions and recommendations change, we will need to change how we manage our operations as well. So we would have to go back to the golf course and just advise them one way or the other, whether we would need to close them down, impose more restrictions, or relax the restrictions. And they're aware of that. They're aware that we're following the guidelines and restrictions enforced by the public health officer.
That's great. Any further questions or discussion on that? So because there's just a limited number of us here today, Councillor Elliott, are you still with us? I don't see any image.
I am, Gary.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to ask the question, unless you have any questions regarding the motion on the table. Oh,
it's good.
Councillor Lowe, Ms. Lowe, you have your hand up. Sorry.
Councillor Elliott, is there a reason we can't see you? We need to see you.
I'm not sure. I've got the stop video participants, share content. It should be there.
Okay, can you unstop the video so that you just see the camera and no
Start
line,
video.
no red line through it?
Yeah, start video, stop video. So the red line's gone. Let's see.
You can do, Cindy? No?
Did something slide in front of your camera, perhaps? The front-facing camera is on the side of the iPad in case something's blocking it.
There it is.
There you go.
I'm in.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. I don't know if you want to see me, but there you go.
Oh, no, now
We're back to black. So you know, we'll just give you a moment to get situated there. We did see your floor there for a minute, or the ceiling or something.
your camera's not facing you.
There we go.
Okay, great.
Councillor Elliott in his glory. Thank you for being here.
Oh, in his glory.
Okay, Councillor, do you have any questions regarding the golf course, or are you okay with me asking the question?
I'm good.
All right, so I'm going to ask the question. All those in favor of the motion that's on the table? Motion is approved. Thank you. We're going to move on to item number 2. Someone want to put that on the table, please?
Your worship, do you want
Yes.
to have Lori go through some high levels of this presentation, or did you want to do all the resolutions first?
Let's just do the resolution, get that on the table and second, and then I'm going to ask Mr. Nato to give us a high overview, if that's all right.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. So, Councillor Ryan, did you have your hand up? Or Councillor Charlotte, somebody want to put that on the table, please?
I can put it on the table.
Okay, thank you.
That the request from Cedar and Spruce Consulting Limited to open Williamson Lake Park and Campground at a reduced capacity be revisited after May 31st, 2020.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Elliott. Now, Mr. Nato, could I ask you to give us a high overview of the motion on the table?
Yes, Your Worship. So as I mentioned in the staff report, the caretakers have requested to open as scheduled. Most municipally owned campgrounds have remained closed following the leads set both by the provincial and federal governments. The main concern is that by opening, we will see an increased number of visitors coming to the community, which is in contradiction to the public health officer's order to stay home and avoid non-essential travel. So we are recommending that this request be revisited after May 31st, 2020, at which time the public health officer may choose to relax the restrictions or make changes.
Great. Councillors, any further questions on opening at a limited capacity? Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's any way we could restrict the campsite portion, but still allow for the waterfront to remain open so that locals can use it.
Just, you know, again, we go back to the safety of the community. How many people can we allow down there, that sort of thing. I don't think we're up to whether the park at this point is clean enough to have that. And I think the idea was to get the staff in to start doing some work to clean up, and that would give the people at this point about 30 days before the end of the month to kind of get things cleaned up before we allowed great access. But Mr. Natter, do you have any comment on that?
Through your worship, I am sitting in on a series of video conferences with other recreation professionals throughout the province. And so recently today we met and we discussed outdoor water spaces and what the opening of those spaces would look like. We're not at that stage yet, but we are trying to develop a phasing plan that we could start to see some spaces open up. So I will keep council informed as we get to that stage, but we are definitely working towards opening up some of those spaces, and that would include the water spaces as well.
All right, great.
So
Councillor
just
Ryan?
a clarification. So when you say we're not ready yet, is that just because the maintenance and cleanup and whatnot just hasn't happened yet because of delays in COVID and whatnot?
Not necessarily. It's also at the stage that we're at with the current restrictions in place with gathering, and just how that would be managed in terms of physical distancing.
Right.
That
okay.
Together a game plan on how we would address that and try to keep people safe while they're recreating in those areas.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Councillor Charlotte?
So if I'm understanding this correctly, especially in light of the golf course conversation, where the outdoor parks, where we have lots of space, there's no water, there's no shared facilities, those are relatively open at the moment, where the locals can use trails, the locals can get outside, get some fresh air. But anything that brings us together, so metal parks with metal structures, parks with water features, those are not part of the current state we're in, and that will come in at later times. Is that what I'm understanding correctly?
Mr. Nato?
Through your worship, yes, currently our open park spaces are closed, our fields, and typically they are closed this time of year, regardless of COVID or not. And that's because the fields aren't ready yet. They're still too wet. We haven't had our maintenance staff work on them yet. So typically we open at the end of the first week in May usually is our opening. So we may be a little bit delayed this year because we didn't call staff back right away. We are just phasing them back into the work plan. But our hope is in the next couple of weeks, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, we should see those park spaces opening up as well.
Councillor Elliott, do you have any questions or concerns regarding the campground?
My question might be regarding the state of Williams Lake. There's a couple of trees that were down, and the fence around the former mini golf area is sort of damaged. I wonder who's responsible for that, or is that the contractor?
Mr. Nato?
Through your worship, we're responsible for that. We will have crews. I believe they were supposed to have dealt with that tree this week, if they haven't already, but we will be responsible for cleaning up the tree branches and repairing the fence.
Fair enough.
Okay, any further comments on opening Williamson's Lake at a limited capacity? Hearing none, I'm going to ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to corporate administration. We'll put this motion on the table, and then I'm going to ask corporate. Oh, Ms. Lowe, you're waving your hand there. Sorry.
Worship, there may be some other discussion that Lori would like to have in a public forum with respect to other facilities that she takes care of.
Okay, great. Sorry, I missed that, Mr. Nato. I had read through everything. I'm going like, okay, I got to pay attention because it's not in there. Anyway, Mr. Nato, if you could give us an update on Parks Rec and
Okay, sure. Thank you, Your Worship. So I'll just touch really quickly on some high-level points, just give you an overview. As you're aware, most of the orders put forward by the public health officer did impact the recreational facilities. In particular, programming. Most of our programming that we had planned for the spring and summer months has been canceled. We're anticipating that the physical distancing requirement will impact the manner in which we deliver programs in the future. So I have staff right now working on thinking about creative ways that we could offer programming once we do open, in particular in the park spaces where we're going to really try to be encouraging people to get out and use our park spaces. And we feel that maybe we'll be able to program within those park spaces in the near future. So we're working on that. Facility booking, we had a number of weddings and large events planned in the facility this summer that we've had to cancel. Most of them have been booked for 2021. So I have staff working with them to figure out what those events look like. The aquatic center programming has been canceled till the end of August. It's still unclear on when the aquatic center will be able to open. We're not anticipating that it will be in the very near future. So in the meantime, we've got the maintenance staff working on the pool shutdown so that we'll be ready to open whenever the health order is relaxed, which means that we won't be doing a shutdown in September. We'll be able to stay open from then on. There was minimal impact on the arena facility. The facility did close 2 to 3 weeks earlier than it normally would, but most of the season will not be impacted unless it's determined that we can't open as scheduled at the end of August, which I will bring that forward at the time. Parks and playgrounds are currently closed to the public, but like I mentioned earlier, we are trying to work out a phasing plan on how it would look for the community to have the park spaces open in phases. And I'll be working on that next week to get some proper signage lined up so that we could open these spaces safely. The trails are working fine. All the city-owned trails are open to the public and have been signed. The preschool, which closed on March 16th, and it will most likely remain closed in accordance with the public health directives. We don't anticipate that we'll be open for our preschool season, which is scheduled in June. So it may be that this function of the department doesn't open again until September. Special events. So the big impact to the special events was the class order that limited the number of people gathering to 50. That has had a significant impact on a number of annual events that occur. Most of them have canceled. So we're working through the logistics of that. The farmers market, I've been working with both of the associations to get them set up in an alternate location that would allow for sufficient physical distancing requirements. Both groups have come up with management plans for each of their spaces. The food market or farmers market will be located in Centennial Park, and the Revelstoke Farm and Craft Market will be located in the Aquatic Center parking lot. So they've got great plans, great setup. So I'm optimistic that everything will go very well for them both. And that's about it for me.
I have a
On the
quick question.
Go ahead.
When it comes to the, I noticed in the report, there were some budget savings and the revenue lost. And I'm curious if there has been any exploration into reducing insurance on any of our buildings that aren't being used at this time, and what kind of savings that might have.
Go ahead, Mr. Nato.
Your worship, I'll have to defer that to the Director of Finance.
So, Your Worship, most of the insurance costs for the buildings are related to the property and the equipment, mostly for theft or for fire. And so there won't be any savings there, unfortunately, on the insurance. And then the balance of the insurance is liability insurance, and that is based on experiences and past history. And again, won't have any impact for this year, perhaps in the future, but not at this time.
So there's no way we could reduce our liability insurance since there's such a small risk of having any claims during this time?
I've reached out to MIA, and it is done based on past experiences. So when those past experiences get into a future year, then we may be able to, but we don't insure for a dollar value. We insure for coverage. So
Sorry, I'm having a bit of a hard time understanding that. Can you just explain it one more time?
We can't reduce the premiums for liability coverage at this time.
Okay. Because you pay on an as needed basis?
It's paid based on an experience. So kind of similar to what ICBC would do if we have your insurance premiums are based on previous claim experience of the insurance company.
Right, but you have also like different limitation or coverage amounts, right, for different,
It's
I don't know.
not specific. Yeah, it's not
So
specific.
you can't
to
reduce your deductibles or whatever it is, like car insurance?
It's for the city as a whole. It's not done by location. It's insurance for the city as a whole. So if we did that, we would be reducing it for the entire city.
I see. Well, that's unfortunate. Okay, thanks.
It is.
Any further questions or concerns regarding Parks and Rec? Councillor
Hey,
Elliott?
Gary, just curious, lost revenue, any idea of a number for the last 2 months, what that might be and what it might be for the summer, how that might end up on our financial statement? Lost revenues.
Mr. Nutter or Ms. McCabe, do you want to weigh in on either of that with projected numbers, or are we premature with that?
Through your worship, we do have some estimates of what the projections are. They are obviously a little bit premature at this point, but we do have some estimates. The recreational facilities are subsidized by taxation. So when they're closed, obviously the amount of subsidy required is reduced. That reduced subsidy requirement will probably be used to offset the additional interest costs because of cash flow shortages. So at this time, we're not expecting up until the end of April, we haven't seen large amounts of savings, but we'll have to see how that goes. I'm reviewing that every month.
Okay. Councillor Elliott, is that sufficient information at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I realize the Recs department is subsidized and funded through our tax dollar, but just was curious whether there are savings and where we'll end up. I know we have to pay for the maintenance and the details that go in to keep the place available for use, but it's just be good to know how much this is hurting us.
Mhm.
And I think, you know, we're going to be a month or two down the road before we actually have some figures on that. Now that we're going to be starting into what we would normally do in September, that's going to change the figures as far as some of the maintenance work that's going to be done. We're going to bring back staff into different capacities, that sort of thing. So right now, if there's any savings, they're going to be kind of offset with some of the things that we need to be doing. So I don't think we're that far ahead of the game, if at all.
No.
Nato, do you want to weigh in at all, or?
Your worship, I think Tanya, or the Director of Finance, has done a good job summarizing it. We can work on bringing forward future projections so that council can have a better understanding of expenses and what that would look like.
Okay.
Any further comments, Councillor Elliott?
No, it's good. Thank you.
So any further questions for Mr. Nato on Parks and Rec? Seeing none, I'm going to now move on to corporate administration. And I'll leave it up to Ms. Lowe or Mr. Slingerland to give a report.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Corporate Administration Department continues to operate at full capacity. The COVID-19 pandemic has required that Corporate Administration Department shift focus to supporting the transition to remote council meetings and updating policies and procedures to ensure compliance with the recommendations and orders from the Provincial Health Officer. The key functions of corporate administration: supporting mayor and council, developing policies and procedures, preparing bylaws, communications, bylaw enforcement, and ensuring the smooth operational flow of legislative matters has continued without missing a beat. The departmental staff remain hard at work in City Hall, abiding by social distancing guidelines. The bylaw enforcement team has shifted focus from their usual work to prioritizing educating the public on the provincial health orders. Specific COVID-19 patrols have been taking place since the start. We're happy to report that most citizens are complying with the requirements and working constructively with their officers. File counts, which have been trending upward for the year, continue to rise. Before the pandemic started, a more robust officer schedule had been adopted. The fortuitous timing could not have been better. While bylaw enforcement officers are focusing on education, their ticketing is down. Citizens are encouraged to work with their officers and comply with all bylaws and regulations. Tickets can be issued up to a year after the offense, so we encourage all residents who have been in contact with bylaw enforcement to work constructively with them to resolve any issues. Going forward, the Corporate Administration Department has been working with IT to improve remote council meetings, address public hearing requirements, and work with the province to set provisions around holding a by-election in the fall to fill the vacant council position. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slingerland. I know I'm hearing from residents when it comes to our bylaw enforcement and the way that they're interacting with the community. It's all been positive. We're very appreciative of the kind ways that bylaw enforcement have been dealing with them. And that's coming back to me many times over. So I'm appreciative of that. And of course, being in the office, I see the work that's being done by your administration department, and we're appreciative of that. Councillors, are there any comments from Mr. Slingerland on his report, or any questions about the administration department? Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, I'm just curious if we have any update on the by-election and how that's going to roll out.
So we've been given some reprieve as far as timelines go. So we're talking about doing something in the fall, and I don't think we've nailed down exactly how or when we're going to do it, or how we're going to do it with the COVID-19 as far as electronics and that sort of thing. So some of those things will kind of be updated as we move along, seeing how the provincial government will allow us to do things. Ms. Lowe or Mr. Slingerland, do you have any further comment on how that will move forward?
Your Worship, I did actually talk to media with respect to setting a by-election date. And so what we're looking at is the fall, sometime in the fall. So getting ready for that, we'll see that towards the end of or middle of summer preparations. What we were waiting for and what the province encouraged us to wait for was some type of a relief with the mass gatherings. If we don't have that, we're also now looking at ways we can hold the election, stretch it out, more days, more space. So our goal is definitely to aim for fall.
Councillor Ryan, any
Thanks.
further comment?
Nope.
Okay. Any other comments from councillors regarding administration report? Councillor Elliott?
One of the things that sort of I would like to see addressed in the future is a dispute resolution system or a process that I don't know, our citizens can go through if they do have an issue with the city. And I'm just curious whether that's in place, or is the corporate officer the person responsible for it, or is it Dawn's role, or how can we improve upon what we have if we have one, and if we don't have one, we should probably create one.
It would depend on Through your worship, it would depend on what the issue is. We have, an administrative fairness process. So if a resident feels that they've been treated unfairly, they can make an official complaint, and that will go through a process. If it is an interaction through bylaw enforcement, where they, for example, disapprove of a ticket, they can challenge that ticket through the court system. There are numerous ways in which they can informally and formally seek resolution through the city. The important part is if they do have an issue, is to get in contact with myself or Dawn, and we will address that and give them direction.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I just want to make sure that whatever we have is sort of unbiased or it's arm's length, and it comes across as arm's length. It's like policing the police force. You don't have the city officials monitoring city progress if there's a confrontation. So I just want to make sure that we maintain that sort of objectivity.
Through your worship, there's also the ombudsperson office, that if somebody feels that they are not getting an adequate resolution through the city system, that they can go to that independent body for that resolution. There is a fair amount of robust systems in place to ensure that residents and citizens are treated fairly and their issues are handled.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further comments or questions regarding the administration report? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Slingerland, for your report. I would like to move on to Ms. Braun and Community Economic Development.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the Community Economic Development Department is responsible for 3 different areas within the city budget, including social development and food security, tourism, and the business sector. Social development and food security sector has experienced major impacts of COVID-19 through job and income loss, food insecurity, and disruptions to provision of services for vulnerable community members due to heightened restrictions in the short term. Also looking at longer-term impacts such as disruptions to the supply chain for food delivery. The tourism sector has experienced an immediate loss of revenue, along with the impacts of unemployment and uncertainty for the future, pending government directions on easing restrictions for public gatherings. And across the business sector, the impact of COVID-19 is felt pretty severely, with small businesses such as retailers, personal service providers, and those in the hospitality sector particularly hard hit. Efforts to date have included our social development coordinator updating our revelstokelife.ca website to ensure access to information for service provisions, revised hours, different levels of funding that are available to clients, and hosting online roundtable meetings with sector representatives. In addition to accessing funding for poverty reduction, new funding commitments have been obtained for mental health and substance use, as well as age-friendly planning. So that sector is equipped with additional resources and contract staff for the next year, and will be able to ensure that council is well informed of the needs, challenges, and opportunities that will improve the delivery of services during the social and economic upheaval and disruption anticipated. In the tourism sector, aside from the most immediately felt impacts of loss of employment, closures of business, they are expecting a mid to long-term reduction of MRDT revenue, which will impact the delivery of marketing services at a time when it'll be critical for both tourism, Revelstoke, and the Visitor Information Center to be gearing up upon recovery when the time comes. Resort municipality funding will continue at its base budget level, so there's less impact in that area. Although our top-up funds that is tied to annual MRDT performance can be expected to decrease in the longer term. Currently, our RMI funding for delivery of events in 2020 is suspended or postponed while we look at our options around delivering funding for incurred costs and supporting our arts and culture sector workers throughout the postponement of events. So we'll be bringing some funding options to council for their approval in the next month. The Tourism Initiatives Committee will be meeting in May to discuss and recommend to council approval of RMI funds for postponed events, as well as proposed reallocations to projects that are outlined in the resort development strategy that can be embarked on immediately. In the economic development sector area, we're working closely with partners in the business Center and Visitor Information Center, including the Chamber of Commerce, Community Futures, Basin Business Advisors, and Tourism Revelstoke, to respond to the needs of the business community. So that includes updates to websites around, again, businesses that are open, their anticipated service levels, how customers can access their services. They're hosting presentations on relevant topics, whether insurance, tax implications, accounting, with business roundtables weekly. And finally, the Economic Development Commission met yesterday to make recommendations for the appointment of an economic recovery task force. CD staff will work with our business partners and community stakeholders here at the Business Information Center under the guidance of the Commission, and working in partnership with the City Council and the CSRD to seek approval for a business recovery plan, develop resources to support business retention and to attract investment, access funds to support growth and recovery initiatives, leverage TELUS Insights data to assess the impact of COVID-19 closures on our economy, and to implement the economic recovery plan in collaboration with local and regional partners. That's essentially what has been happening in economic development. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Councillors, any questions for Ms. Braun? Councillor Charlotte?
Not really a question so much, it's just a comment, and this kind of applies to everybody so far. I'm super impressed with how well we're working with our counterparts in other communities and other levels of government just to try and move forward and share ideas, whether it's looking at how to open parks or how to engage and do public engagement for public hearings and stuff through corporate admin. And now with ECDEV and putting together a task force and trying to work together on how we get out of this. I'd noticed that the Chamber of Commerce is hosting a roundtable tomorrow with our federal and provincial elected officials. So I'm looking forward to attending that and just trying to take this day, one day at a time. But I'm grateful to see that we're all working together on this.
Great. Councillor Ryan?
And in the report, it mentions that contract deliverables with the city may need to be revised in light of both reduced revenue and service levels. What kind of deliverables, like what is an example of those kinds of deliverables?
For instance, the MRDT funding that is received by the city, collected by accommodators, received by the city and flowed through to the Visitor Information Center and Tourism Revelstoke. With reduced amounts, we'll have to look at reducing perhaps services at the Visitor Information Center and in tourism marketing. And we don't know what that kind of impact will look like yet. But that is a contracted relationship between the city and Tourism Revelstoke and the Chamber of Commerce to provide visitor services.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Councillor Elliott?
It's been about a month and a half or 2 months since we've been addressing this COVID issue. Any word on the street? I mean, the Chamber of Commerce, the Economic Development Committee, is there anything immediate that we should be doing as a city council to start ameliorate or make the situation a bit easier? Anything that has popped up at this point? I know a task force is great, but typically that will go a month down the road before we actually get something productive out of it. I'm just curious.
In the interim, I think the most important resource for businesses is the weekly roundtable, as Councillor Charlotte mentioned. It's an opportunity for business delivery partners to come together, whether the Columbia Basin Business Advisory or Community Futures, Chamber of Commerce, and answer questions in real time. So weekly we have opportunities to interact with any business or tourism operator that has questions, and we can kind of work together as a group to problem solve. We can share best practices. For instance, last week at the Tourism Roundtable, we had RMR and Glacier House Resort sharing best practices for how they're currently managing activities and how they plan to move forward in the future with best practices around health, sanitation, that kind of thing. So right now, that real-time information sharing is probably the most important thing that we're doing.
Sorry.
I think the recovery task force will give us a chance to focus a bit more on the longer term, mid to long term economic impacts, and do some research into best practices from other communities and other economic development practitioners, and see what would work best for Revelstoke, so we can develop a made in Revelstoke consistent, cohesive approach across all industry sectors to move forward.
Yeah, my urgency is kind of important. So the recommendations, the complete set of recommendations may not be necessary. If there's something immediate that we can implement or stuff that that we can act upon, or if there's sore spots that we're not delivering on, that's what we should have pretty immediately.
Absolutely. The plan, the intention is to strike a task force that operates fairly independently, with combining, members from different industry sectors, community service delivery agencies, and members of our commission to be able to be flexible, fast on their feet, identify areas of concern that we're hearing in the weekly meetings, for instance, and immediately try to assign resources to those, or to staff time to try and mitigate those impacts.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Councillor Charlotte.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'm just curious as to maybe we usually have a councillor that sits in on most committee meetings, and I know myself and Councillor Juncker are representatives to the Chamber of Commerce. I have been trying to attend the roundtables as best I can, but I think maybe there's room for better coordination between us as council. That if I'm not able to make it, that I can reach out to Cody and make sure that he is able to, or that maybe someone else can. I think there's value in having a councillor at all of these roundtables and meetings, so that if there's something that on the fly we can respond to or bring back to the rest of council, that might be useful. And I would hope to see a councillor on the Economic Task Force if possible, potentially the same one that sits on our Economic Development Commission. I want to say that's Rob, but I'm not sure on that.
Yeah, currently it's Mayor Sulz who's sitting on the Economic Development Commission, and we would hope to continue with his representation on the task force and perhaps additional councillor representation as well. It's likely there will be a couple of different subgroups that will target different things, whether, for instance, it's common protocols around health and safety and how to communicate those. There could be another group looking at economic impact analysis in the longer term. There could be a third group tackling funding emergencies, that kind of thing. So we'll figure out what's needed.
That sounds amazing. I think it would be great to try and have councillors as much as we have the capacity to. I know I would love to sit in as much as I'm able to.
Wonderful, thank you.
Good. Any further questions for Ms. Braun regarding economic development? Ms. LaRose?
Yes, Your Worship, if council could still consider the recommendations before them, and if we could just go back to the corporate administration
okay,
once this discussion is completed.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So we'll do that right now. We'll go back to corporate administration. There's a motion on the table. If one of the councillors would like to just read that, second it, and we will move it. Councillor Elliott.
The Corporate Administration Department update report written by the Director of Corporate Administration dated April 30th, 2020 be received for information.
Seconder for that motion, Councillor Rind. Any further discussion on that? All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go back to community economic development and put that motion on the table and then go forward. Someone want to move that, please? Councillor Charlotte.
I can do that, but the Community Economic Development Departmental Update written by the Director of Community Economic Development dated April 30th, 2020 be received for information.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Elliott. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. I think that brings us up to date, Ms. LaRose, and we're going to move on to the next. So development services, Ms. Wade, I'm going to get you to start. I'm just going to close down my video here for a second. I'm having some problems on my end. I'm not going anywhere. You're going to see my beautiful smiling face. But Ms. Wade, if you could just start with yours, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will bring forward my Development Services Department update. I first of all wanted to identify that this report is structured in the 4 main streams that the department oversees. It is building services, it is business licensing, it is current planning and long-term planning. So overall, I just wanted to say that with Council's recent adoption of the virtual building inspection policy, that has been gratefully of a great assistance to the department to adjust in regards to maintaining the level activities for doing building inspections and able to collect revenues and service clients. The department had experienced one layoff, and that has affected the updating of our webpage and associated communications, which has caused some delay in getting information out to the community. The key issues facing the department has been that under the Local Government Act, we have an obligation to provide public consultation under many of our current applications and any long-term planning. We have a duty to hold public consultation, and because of the COVID situation, we have been stalled in regards to some of our application processes until we can find alternative ways to address this. We are looking at to the province, because the province has to provide us with some direction and leadership on this in regards to how we can mitigate this situation and what tools will be available to us. And we're also working closely with corporate services in regards to creating tools to address this by using more virtual and digital methods. So overall, I wanted to start off with building services. Building services to date is moving along very fine. We have been very fortunate. There has been about a 31% increase in applications received to date in this first quarter compared to 2019. We've also had an increase of about 36% in our construction values compared to 2019 in this quarter. So far to date, we've issued 20 building permits. We have 17 permits that are still in the final stages. And we have 5 building permits that are being plan checked by our building official. The one hiccup we have had is with other departments who have had to face layoffs that has impacted the internal review process, which did slow down a bit. As staff returns back, that will pick up and move forward. There are several complex buildings that are in the process of fulfilling development permit and subdivision conditions that we are hopeful will be submitting building permit applications in 2020. Regarding business licensing, to date, we've received 53 new business licenses, and we've issued 45 for a total of about 50% of where we have received from last year for the whole year. So this is quite an optimistic outlook for business licensing and the interest in the community with new businesses coming into play. So that is a positive. We've only had one applicant to date that has put their business license on hold to see how the COVID situation evolves. Basically, we're on track with our long-term financial plan in regards to building licensing. And we're working on virtual processes to work with fire and building officials when required for the nature of the business license when required. In regards to planning, I'm going to start first with the current planning. Current planning basically is applications for OCIP amendments, rezoning, development permits, development variance permits, subdivisions, sign permits, liquor and heritage alteration permits. To date, we've received 17 applications. We're slightly lower than 2019. We are attributing this to some of the changes we've made in our customer services, which is in regards to the fact that we're offering a pre-application service. So we're meeting more frequently with people who are interested in meeting with the staff in regards to understanding their applications and for us to provide them with some information on our various bylaws and helping them to provide a more comprehensive and coordinated application, which will then and is helping us with the internal review and expediting the approval process. So we feel the slight gap is because we're offering that service, and we see in the second quarter that we anticipate a greater number of applications coming in. In regards to the long-range planning, we have initiated the capital and operating work plan initiatives that we've discussed with council. We have been able to find some solutions in regards to how we engage with the processes, in particular the OCP vision, how we will go forward with the Johnson Heights neighborhood plan, and working on some of these virtual tools by utilizing focus groups, webpage outreach, and other creative methods that we're using. Our biggest thing here too, again, is, public consultation is a big part of both the current and the long range planning in regards to where and how we engage under the LGA, which in some cases will cause some delays until we have those tools and directives from the provincial government. Overall, though, we have become very creative in technical methods to review applications, to process them, to take payments, and communicate with the applicants to maintain a customer service. These alternative processes have really enabled the department to carry on application reviews and issues to maintain the department's activities and keep in line with the long-term financial plan. I think from the risk point of view, what is of concern to us is the complex and larger subdivisions. A lot of the applications we are still meeting with regularly. They are cautious on how they're moving forward, but nobody has withdrawn and is working with us as we go through this process. That completes my report.
Thanks, Ms. Wade. Councillors, any questions from Ms. Wade? Councillor Ryan?
I'm just curious if you could give us any updates on some of the larger projects. I know we haven't heard any updates since last year, and I'm curious if COVID I know you mentioned nobody's withdrawn their application, but have there been any delays in moving any of those bigger projects forward?
I'll just, first of all, some of the projects, because of the need for public consultation as per the LGA, and the provincial government has not been able to work with those tools to address public hearings yet. We've been moving them forward in various formats. Coming up on your council meeting, I anticipate quite a few applications regarding development permits and development variance permits that will be coming before you. In regards to the larger ones that are in regards to a, say, comprehensive development zone, we have to address a community meeting in regard to obligations that council has asked us to. We will have to come back to council and figure out an alternative way to engage with those applicants to fulfill the requirements that was asked of us, which was to hold a community meeting. And because we can't hold a community meeting, we have to find an alternative way to satisfy what council has asked of staff. So I will be coming back in regards to that with an alternative and a suggestion on how to deal with that. In regards to RMR, they're moving ahead. They're cautious. We are optimistic that they will have projects coming forward this year. They too are looking at it, but they have not withdrawn any projects, but we are working together on a bi-weekly basis to format what their requirements are to move their projects forward. In regards to Mackenzie Village, it's the same thing. We are moving forward with their requirements for subdivision and working through those components that have to be addressed. And so most of the major projects are all moving ahead. The hiccup we will have is when it comes to the public hearing.
Okay, so when you mention there's components that have to be addressed, that's just like, is the city providing enough? Do we have enough resources to provide every developer with, you know, the sort of service that they require on our end?
Yeah.
To get those components fulfilled?
Yes, yes, we do. And in many cases, we provide the information, but we're not like the project manager. We have to rely on their consulting team to provide us back with the necessary documents for us to review. And we provide guidance on that and wait for that to come back.
Okay, and I heard from your report that some of the processes have been more efficient because, you know, it's just nice to, now we have these new tools to be able to do things more digitally, which can create some efficiency. So I'm curious if that has been able to improve response times when you're communicating with developers and setting up meetings and things like that.
I would say that we've definitely taken advantage of the virtual meetings, and we find that quite useful. And it's even useful because we can pull documents up on the screen and go. So I think that's been very useful and definitely something we will continue to use. I think so the digital processing of applications, that has really improved things as well. And I think that there's other tools that we can still look at further in regards to how we use our webpage more effectively and interact with the community as well. And as soon as we can have our staff who has been responsible for helping us with the webpage updates, I can see some great improvements there that will help with communication.
Okay, so in your opinion, communication has been adequate and customer service has been good from your department to those requiring service, or are you looking for more resources?
Right now, I think that given that we can only have so many people in the office and people working remotely, that we're sort of at what we can do right now. I think that seeing how the volume of applications moving forward, that would be a discussion for next year's budget. But right now, I think we're adequately serviced.
Okay, and when you mentioned that the council meeting requirement was put in from council, you were saying that you come to council with some different options. I don't want to speak for other councillors, but I, for one, would obviously be okay with some kind of digital engagement, just because from what I've seen, you can almost get more engagement these days because, you know, people aren't running around in so many different places. So it might be, you know, great to have that virtual option available. So yeah,
Ms. Lowe's going to weigh in. There may be some legislation with that.
Yeah, I was going to speak to that too, because there's two different types of engagement. There's the ones that are required under the LGA, which is the public hearing and the format that we have to follow. And that's what we're seeking guidance for from the provincial government. Then there's more the informal community engagements like we've been doing. So I will use Hay Road as an example where council wanted to go back to the community and hold a meeting, but that is not a required.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
But yeah, so so I would say that using the virtual and reaching out with a video presentation and having it on and say you have 3 questions survey is very effective. Yes.
So that is something that we will be exploring. I'm just curious on a timeline because I would hate to think that some people are waiting on this and it's a council decision that we could make pretty easily.
Okay. Well, I will have to bring that back to council so you can direct me. And so I will be doing that.
Sounds good.
Ms. Lowe.
Thank you, Your Worship. So what we're doing, Councillor Ryan, is actually looking into what type of electronic software would be the best. And it would be something that we could implement and use from now on. Because like you said, it's a really good tool. So we're kicking into this. We've got IT and communications doing research on what that looks like, so that when the province does come forward with the relaxation on how we can hold public hearings, that we're ready to hit the ground running. So with just one public hearing, or one public, information meeting and in hold, we'll be absolutely ready to hit the ground running within 2 weeks to be able to hold these type of meetings. So we have been preparing for that.
That's good. That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions, councillors, for Ms. Wade? Councillor Elliott, then Councillor Charlotte.
Just on the number of permits. So there's 43 that we've sort of gotten through the system of the last that are in the system currently. Is that correct?
There's 43 applications received to date as of like a few days ago. So
yeah, and a lot of those applications have probably been in the works for like preparation and getting ready for it and submitting them and going through the city system. Do you foresee, there's a bit of crystal ball gazing right now, what do you foresee about the future? I mean, are you seeing new projects come in, or are these things that have been in the queue for a while and they're just now getting through?
Ms. Wade.
So the building permit applications that we've received have been relatively new applications.
Okay.
So the ones that I was talking about that we are foreseeing are the ones that are going to come out of the development permit process, where council has approved some of the development permits and they're waiting for issuance, or we're working on subdivisions. And we know that there are various buildings associated with those. And we were anticipating those coming in. And we are above what we were last year by quite a bit. And we were 31% more. And we haven't seen a slowdown yet. And we haven't seen a withdrawal.
Oh, that was one of my questions. Any withdrawals or what's the timeline for a development permit? If we've given them approval or you've given them approval, how long do they have to implement?
Are you meaning what is if the
hotel? When if the economic environment doesn't dictate it's viable at this stage, how long is the permit valid?
For up to 2 years.
2 years. Okay. And then I guess on the new projects, the pre-application process, is that system or that routine been worked out yet, or are you still engaged with new people, coaching them through a new building?
So are you talking about the internal process?
Or the pre-application process, I guess, on a new building?
So the pre-application process is down pat with us internally. And then we schedule meetings with the applicants, and then we will meet with them. And we'll probably have about 3 meetings with them. And then they finalize their package and do a formal application.
But that's for the last month and a half, that 3-meeting process. Are you able to do it through video, or is it you're really not engaged in it at this stage?
No, we're engaged. We are doing email, we'll do Zooms, we'll do conference calls, we use it all.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
So I just want to reiterate what Ms. Wade is saying. Development services, the planning department, everything's going forward the way it has been. They're utilizing new tools. They've come up with a pre-application process, which actually speeds up the application process for the people so that there's not, with all due respect, more hand-holding. They're actually saying these are what the things that you need to do to make your permitting process more valid and robust so that we can move forward. So all those things are positives as we move forward. Even though we're in the COVID-19 stage, we're seeing that more work's being done and the development department is on top of things. So I'm actually quite pleased with how things are moving forward. Any other comments? Councillor Charlotte, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just another comment on, I remember listening to the changes that Ms. Wade has been doing in the Development Services Department over the last year and a bit. And it feels like, yeah, we've been preparing, and now we're seeing the fruit of the labor. So I'm really grateful to hear that things are going well. The new technology was already set up, so it's a smoother transition for both staff and for our citizens to be able to apply through this new process. And hopefully we can continue to iterate and continue to improve the whole thing and see what this takes us to in the future. I'm again very excited about the potential with improving our public consultation through digital engagement in conjunction with traditional in-person, so that when we can start having gatherings, those that are vulnerable and need that in-person access can, but then those with mobility issues and other reasons why they can't attend in person can engage in digital. And that, yeah, like Councillor Ryan says, hopefully we can see better and more thorough engagement through these difficult days.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, I'm just curious, with the shift to these different procedures, if there are any financial implications for the department that you see or have seen yet in terms of additional third-party fees for consultants to advise on how to do this, or legal or whatnot, and whether you've seen an increase in those costs.
Ms. Wade.
I would say that we've, with legal, we've definitely had to consult just because of the unusual circumstances and draw from their experience with other municipalities. So we are using best practices that have been vetted. In regards to the actual purchasing of digital stuff, we haven't really purchased anything. We're using what we have, like the Zoom meetings and other things that we have available with our IT right now. We might have to pay a little bit more for some of the licensing fees in regards to like Zoom, so that the host can have it for a longer period of time, some of those things. And then as regards to the actual software, the software that we're looking at, that'll be more helpful to us is actually already in our budget, because we had actually had in our budget some money to purchase software, which I'm working with IT and finance on, which was part of our work plan. So I do have that money in.
Great, thank you.
All right, councillors, any further comment on Ms. Wade's report regarding development and planning? There is a motion on the table. If someone could put that motion forward, please. Councillor Charlotte.
Sure, that the report dated April 30th, 2020, written by the Director of Development Services, be received for information.
Councillor Rind seconding. Any further discussion on that motion? Okay, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thanks, Ms. Wade. Appreciate your report and the work that you're doing in your department.
Thank you.
Mr. Black, are you here for engineering?
Your Worship, I am here. I am having technical difficulties with my camera. So if you're, with your indulgence, we will proceed with a blank screen on my behalf.
Absolutely, that's fine.
Thank you very much. This report is a summary of where we are today and the impacts of the pandemic on our operations. I will start the discussion with a summary of the engineering work, and the operations manager, Komanowski, will provide an update on the public works efforts. The parks component of our report has already been addressed through the Parks and Recs Director report. The Engineering and Public Works Department is composed of 5 units. The engineering component, roads, parks, utilities, and buildings in the Public Works yard. We have been slightly impacted by the pandemic, and those impacts are due to having a staff reduction internally. Only 2 internal staff in the engineering department were kept on in order to keep capital projects underway and to support development services as best we could. We are now at full strength again, working individually in offices and remotely. And the real impact was to reviewing building permit and development permit applications due to lack of bandwidth. So in moving forward, we have a lot of capital projects on the way. Big Eddy Waterworks completion. We still have a tank to build up there and some more pipe to lay. Some closeout issues on the Silhouette River water main crossing, mostly bookkeeping and tidying up. We've got a new screen going in at the wastewater treatment plant to duplicate the screen we have now, which will improve our operations at the wastewater plant. The mayor so kindly addressed the startup of our Roundabout project, which created quite a bit of work for us today. However, we will make that better as we move forward. We also have the pavement maintenance program, which will start up in about 3 weeks and extend through the summer. So we'll be able to provide an update to the community and to council on the status of our roads and what has happened in the last 5 years. Pavement patching and crack sealing will start as soon as the asphalt plant opens, which is near the end of the month, the end of May. We've got some work at the Silhouette River pedestrian bridge, where we're seeing the river starting to remove some of the bank. And so we need to fix that so that we don't lose the bridge. We also have some work going on at the snow dump where we're seeing some drainage issues and need to address those. And we are also undertaking phase 1 of the wayfinding signage program, and that kicked off 2 days ago, and we'll be implementing that throughout the year. We also have a couple projects in the tender basket, and those are the City Hall renovation and the Lower Town Capital Works project. We have received those projects, tenders have closed, and we're in the process of reviewing those. We will bring those forward to council in the next few weeks for your approval. Design projects, as the development director has indicated, are underway. Are the stuff at Revelstoke Mountain Resort, the water reservoir, Nickel Road, Camosi conceptual design and layout. We are also completing a water system model and master plan. We're performing surveying for the 2 elementary schools, Columbia Park and Arrow Heights, to perform a tabletop review and safety audit. So the outcome of these things will be a list of projects that we can implement to start improving the safety of all the children in those areas and access to those areas. Hopefully the school district will also be able to continue their funding opportunities to support these projects also. We also expect that the federal government may implement a new grant program to stimulate the economy. These projects are typically what they call shovel ready, which means we need to have projects that are well into design, if not complete with design and ready to go to tender. And to support that, staff will allocate some resources to create some projects that will be applicable to this. Ideas that we are throwing around are sidewalk on Airport Road from McKenna to Nickel, the school improvements, perhaps some water system upgrades, and those are the only ones I can think of at this current moment. We are going to defer a couple projects starting up, and this is due to the finance director's report that has indicated there's an opportunity for us to be a little short in revenues for water and sewer. And so by delaying the startup of the sewer master plan and potentially the liquid waste management plan, we can ensure that we are staying within our fiscal budget that council approved. And if the funding shortfall does not happen, we will ramp up and accelerate those programs to get them underway this year. That concludes my portion of the presentation. Any questions or comments?
Councillors, do you have any questions for Mr. Black? Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could comment on the DCCs. I know you mentioned that there's a few different pieces that all kind of flow into it, but just for the public's sake, just an update on where we're at with that timeline would be great.
Yeah, thank you. Through your worship, the water model is the first component that we will complete in the next few weeks, which will tell us where we need to build future facilities to support the build out of the community, assuming a growth rate, which is all part of the planning OCP project. Other components of that are the sewer master plan, the transportation master plan, which includes roads, sidewalk, trails, transit. A fourth component would be stormwater and where we need to build new stormwater facilities and what those things look like. And I believe that's the extent of those projects. Now, once we know what we have to build in the future, that will then tell us who and how we can allocate costs to as a part of the future. Do the residents need to pay for infrastructure that may not be needed unless the community continues to grow? So in order to properly address the DCCs, we need to have these tools in place, and we will support the OCP development an update with these reports.
So I guess it's a bit of a chicken and the egg situation, but in terms of the OCP and then these 4 plans coming into place, what do you and Ms. Wade think the timeline is on getting all of that sorted out?
I cannot speak to the OCP component of it. I believe that we will be in hand, likely be able to address 3 out of those 4 this year. The big one in my mind, and again, due to the public consultation components, is how we engage the community in these master plans. And so there's a lot of pieces here, as the town manager has indicated and Ms. Wade has indicated, that we need to figure out what our platform is to engage the community for these projects.
Thanks.
Councillor Charlotte.
Yeah, I'm curious. There was talk a while back, and forgive me if I don't remember all the details of it, about doing a minor update to the DCC bylaw to do with inflation rates while we try to get all these transportation master plans and other things in order. Are we anywhere with that?
Ms. Wade?
Yes, Your Worship. I thought I'd just jump in on that since it was before Mr. Black's time. That Mr. Black and I are working on that together and to determine whether it's a minor or major, because it has different ramifications. And given that it's become much more complex with what Mr. Black has to do in regard to these studies, we'll have to come back and to council this once we've got infrastructure reports in play. I don't know if Mr. Black wants to add anything.
Mr. Black?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm comfortable with the response that Ms. Wade offered. It is true. We're not certain whether it is a minor or major update, and we need to further understand that with the province before we can push forward.
Councillor Charlotte, any further comment on that, or you're comfortable with that answer?
No, I'm comfortable with that.
Thank you. Councillors, anything further from Mr. Black before we move on? Councillor Elliott. Have to unmute your mic.
It's unmuted there, Gary.
You're back.
There you go.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just on the list of projects, 2 that have gone out to tender. One's for the City Hall and the other was for Lower Town. That's the discretionary one. That's where we can decide if we're going to hold on to our money or commit to these projects. Is that correct?
Mr. Black.
Through Your Worship, both of these projects are funded currently in our 2020 budget. Council has the opportunity to review that at the time we present our recommendation to Council to award those projects.
Okay, thank you.
There's been a grant funding for City Hall, so I think prudent thing would be to move through with that to access those grant funds. Anyway, we'll move forward. Any other questions from Mr. Black? Otherwise, Mr. Komanowski, if you would give your report, please.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you.
Oh, Ms. LaRose, do you want me to do the whole thing before we get the final report in? It's kind of one motion. We can move that forward if you like.
That's your choice, Your Worship.
Okay, let's do that. Let's move the motion forward, and then Mr. Komanowski, I'll get you to carry on. Someone would like to read that motion, please, about engineering. Councillor Charlotte.
I can do that. That the report dated April 30th, 2020, written by the Director of Engineering and Public Works, providing an update on the status of engineering and public works projects and the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, be received for information.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Rind. Any further discussion on the motion before we move forward? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Mr. Komanowski, if you'd carry on, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Basically, I'll just touch on some of the changes we've seen in staffing from last week. This week, we've had 2 more returns to the Public Works in the Roads Department. Utilities is full staffed. The Buildings Carpentry Department is fully staffed. And we've also had 2 more in the parks come back this week. So I think the graduated return is working fairly well here. We're using a lot of measures to have people report in different areas, such as the arena, the Parks Department, the buildings, into the carpenter shop. Our road staff are, taking turns one at a time going in and out of the locker room facility. We've put in a outhouse with a wash station in the yard. So really trying to put some measures in place for staff to feel comfortable coming back. And so far, I think it's working reasonably well. Next week, we're planning on 4 more returns in parks. And then the following week, we'll have 2 more in Public Works as well, and 2 more in parks for the week of the 11th. So we still won't be full staffed after the week of the 11th, but we're going to play it week by week and day by day with our returns. Some of the things that we're actively doing, as Ms. Donato had stated earlier, the Buildings Department is busy in the pool since it's our informal pool shutdown. So they're doing a lot of work in there right now. Parks is cleaning up, doing some gardening. I think you've seen some familiar faces back in the gardens, and that's nice to see. We're looking at getting onto the fields and irrigation next week with the return of some of those more qualified turf and irrigation staff. It is an opportunity to try and improve our fields as well, because they're not being used that heavily. As Ms. Donato also stated, we're not that far behind. Typically, it is still wet out there, but we probably will see an opportunity to do extra work on our fields this year due to a little bit of a later start. Public Works, roads, we're doing sweeping, washing. We're pretty much out of the downtown area. The residential areas were completed last week by a contractor sweeper. We might have to go back and do a little tuning up here and there if we see some as the snow recedes, but pretty much out of the neighborhoods. The line painting is expected to be done. They were saying before the long weekend in May, but to be honest, I expect them after the long weekend in May. We're also working on snow removal damage. There's always some carnage after a heavy year of snow removal, fences, signs, those types of things, a lot of lawn repair. So we'll be on that as we get more staff back in the month of May. We're doing some storm works, and then the utilities are busy with preventative maintenance. And we do have some capital projects starting up as well. As Steve mentioned, some of that we're involved in is the Ped Bridge, snow dump myself, equipment replacement. We're also looking at getting some tenders out for some of that equipment. One of them being the recycler for asphalt patching, ditching, capital, and then utilities, some of their capital works as well. So I think that's what I wanted to mention today.
Great, thanks, Mr. Komanowski. It's nice to see the staff coming back and at the graduated way of bringing them forward so they're all safe. Staff I've been speaking to are appreciative to be able to come back to work and are happy that you put things in place that they're safe. So thank you for that. Councillors, any questions for Mr. Komanowski? Councillor Charlotte.
I'm really appreciative to hear the best practices that are being put in place. We've been talking a lot about phasing and what does this look like as we start to open up. And I think in the interest of business continuity and the security of our city that we can continue to operate is that as we have these good habits in place, that as we move forward into the coming months, we won't be as vulnerable to the virus reappearing in our midst. So I'm really grateful to hear that. It's going to take some time to get used to the new normal, but seeing our city staff and people making those moves, it helps the rest of us get more comfortable with it as well. So thank you very much for all this.
Great.
Yeah, and I might add, Your Worship, we are having challenges with some of our PPE, such as masks. That, one of the things that we have a concern with is having 2 people in a vehicle and having that mask on. So we're desperately trying. We have ordered some equipment and awaiting its arrival.
And that's the unfortunate thing. We're all in that same hurry up and wait mode with all of this, just right around the country and the world. And I have the same issues in my business as well. So
Right.
thanks for trying to get that and continuing to push forward to make sure that everyone's safe. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Elliott?
Just curious, I know the sporting, the soccer is sort of decommissioned for a while, baseball is sort of on delay. Do we need to maintain the fields at an exceptionally high level? Or I mean, I just worry that we're hiring people to take care, maintain a field that may not need it. I'm just, I know we need to make some improvements, but that more is a luxury than a necessity. And then I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, Your Worship. Yes, Your Worship. The irrigation maintenance has to be performed. We want to fire these things up and maintain them. So it's a lot of money in our infrastructure there, as well as our fencing and our fields. We're going to have to do that field work so we can mow. We can't just leave the fields to go to pasture, so to speak. So a lot of that work that would normally be performed would have to be performed anyways. So we can definitely manage the amount of hours, but it is a good opportunity as well to try and improve the fields and, you know, from a noxious weed perspective as well, because we are pesticide-free playing fields. It gives us an opportunity to strengthen up that turf and make sure that we can get it ready when it opens up.
On another topic, the street sweeper. I saw one go by with an attachment to the loader. Is that relatively new?
Yes, it is. It was purchased in this season, 2020.
And is it to complement the one we already have, or what's the reason for it?
Yes, Your Worship. That pickup broom works very well for picking up like the larger. Right after the initial flush of winter, we go in and do the curbs. The street sweepers we have a regenerative air sweeper, and they're not the best as opposed to a mechanical. So this acts like a mechanical sweeper, and it picks up the large volumes, and it doesn't require a lot of water. So it's a good mechanism to go out early in the spring and get the larger amounts and keep that dust under control. Okay. And it is a complement to our sweeper and helps us get done in a timely fashion as well.
Would it be, I mean, just second guessing, would it be more effective to have a single street sweeper that would do both?
It's still, we find that, and also I should have mentioned that pickup attachment works really well in turf areas as well. So you can take it off, sort of off-road, so to speak, and use it in turfed areas. And we will consider a mechanical sweeper again if we replace our regenerative air.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Komanowski, Mr. Black, for your report. I'm just appreciative of what you're doing, and it's good to see everybody out there and being safe, and it's actually good to see the work's being done. Thank you again. We're going to move on to finance. Ms. McCabe.
Thanks, Your Worship. As the other departments, the finance department has been impacted by the COVID pandemic. From about mid-March to about mid-April, the finance department functioned on a reduced staffing level. We have been back to full staffing levels since April 15th, and we are starting to work on getting caught up now. For finance, the biggest challenge has been shifting from dealing with the public in person to having to do things without that contact. We've seen an increase in phone calls and emails as a result of this. To make things easier for the public, there are several initiatives that have been completed. We've worked on the deferment of the payment deadline for the second quarter commercial utility invoices. We've worked on a reduction of the fee for return payments down to nil. The deferment of the property tax due date from July 2nd to September 2nd. And then implementing an option for those on the property tax installment plan to defer their payments for the month of April to August. There's several other initiatives still being worked on. Staff are currently reaching out to the banks that do not accept online payments on behalf of the city to get set up with them. We're also working on allowing payments by credit card over the phone for those fees that can be paid by credit card. Staff are also developing different options for homeowners to claim the provincial homeowner grant this year if they can't come into City Hall, and even if they can. We'll also be setting up a drop box outside of City Hall so that people can leave their property tax payments and or their homeowner grant forms in there if they can't come into City Hall. The IT department is also being impacted by the COVID pandemic. IT has been responsible for ensuring the EOC is functioning, setting up all of the employees who are working from home, as well as getting the city set up to conduct meetings as we're doing now. Mr. Wilson has been working tirelessly to meet the IT needs of the city during this time. That's it, Your Worship.
Thanks, Ms. McCabe. Councillors, any questions regarding Ms. McCabe's report? I'm appreciative of the fact that you're looking at alternative ways and have set up alternative ways for people to pay their taxes, and you know, we've put things in place to make it as easy as possible for them. And I'm grateful for council putting that in place, but also indicating to those who can afford to pay their taxes by the July 2nd, the old deadline, we'd appreciate having those funds to move forward. But anyway, we've got things in place for September 2nd for those who need that extra time, and alternative ways of people claiming their homeowners grant and the like. So thank you for what you're doing, Ms. McCabe.
Thank you.
So if someone would like to put that motion on the table that's there in your package, please.
Gary, I just have a question.
Go ahead, Councillor Elliott.
I think at the in-camera session we had,
So if it's
investigated.
in camera, if it's in camera, Mr.
No.
Elliott, you can't bring up those things.
Okay.
So is there anything on the report that's here now that you would like to ask Ms. McCabe about?
I think I was wondering if there's any opportunity to give a discount to people who pay by July 2nd rather than September 2nd.
Okay, Ms. McCabe, I think you'd actually, we had kind of talked about that earlier. So would you like to weigh in?
Yes, Your Worship. There is an option under the community charter to allow discounts for early payments. I have been doing some research into what other communities are doing. At this time, the only community I've identified that actually has considered this option would be Kamloops, but they are not moving forward with it because of the complexity in administering it and the cost of adding it as a feature to the software they use. An option like discounting would provide financial relief to those who can afford to pay their property taxes by the regular due date. It doesn't really provide financial relief. It doesn't provide financial relief to taxpayers who can't afford to pay their property taxes by the original due date. But it would create an additional cost for all taxpayers that we would have to consider in the budget.
It would also give the city's cash flow, help solve the city cash flow problem, which we're going to borrow money to compensate for.
Correct, it would. The cost of the discount, though, would outweigh any savings in interest costs because we have the cash flow on hand, because the discount would be probably more significant than the interest savings.
And then the end result would be that the people who pay early, they get their discount, but the rest of the community basically would have to foot the bill for that discount for others. So, you know, you look at it and say, what's fair to the community as a whole?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions for Ms. McCabe? Okay, so I'm going to ask that someone put the motion on the table for finance. Councillor Charlotte.
That the Finance and IT Departmental Update written by the Director of Finance dated April 30th, 2020 be received for information.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott, any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to the RCMP, Staff Sergeant Grabinski. If you'd like to give your report, please. If you could unmute your mic, Staff Sergeant. Thank you.
Technology beyond my means. Good afternoon, Your Worship. In addition to my written report, I want to thank the community for the support, the well wishes, and the care packages we've been receiving here at the detachment. Although the pandemic is a health ministry emergency, we've really appreciated the kind words, the local citizens who've inquired as to how the police and staff are doing in the detachment. It's gone a long way for morale and keeping us spirited to continue on. We have a great working relationship with the other agencies in the community as well as city. We have a good supply of PPE. Sadly, I can't share it at this moment. Sorry, Darren, but we are in a position to be able to take care of our members who are out on the road interacting with the public. We continue to provide enforcement on the federal acts, the legislative acts of the province, as well as municipal bylaws. We're also very accustomed to addressing hazardous materials and biohazards, I guess you could say. That's sort of what we often do. We do have the new roundabout that we're working around, and the detours are being improved. We worked with the agencies a little bit today to help with that. We'd ask the public to stop calling 911 to complain about the roundabout and the detours. We are working to keep the speeds down and to keep the stop signs enforced, but taking up the 911 time is involving a lot of time for our officers. The workload and the calls for service does remain exactly on par with last year, even with half the population. So with the reduction of the tourism and the seasonal workers, we still have the same workload. So I would say that overall we have more work than previous years. We have worked out a CP rail agreement to cross their property to shorten our response to responses in the Arrow Heights and hospital area in order to respond in a very rapid way. So we've worked with the superintendents of the CP rail property. So that will assist us a great deal. So I appreciate everything that's going on right now and open for any questions.
Councillors, any questions for Staff Sergeant Grabinski? I think, Councillor Elliott, did you have something?
No.
Okay. I want to again thank you for what you're doing, for what your members are doing, and appreciate some of the difficulties that we're going to have just for a little bit as we iron out what's happening with the roundabout and that sort of thing. Disappointed that community members are using 911, an emergency a line for complaining about stop signs, that sort of thing. So thanks for bringing that up, and hopefully that will no longer happen. Really appreciate what you guys are doing, and thank you. Okay, so there is a motion on the table regarding accepting the report. So if someone would like to read that, please. Councillor Elliott.
That the RCMP report written by Sergeant Kurt Grabinski dated April 30th, 2020 be received for information.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Staff Sergeant Grabinski. Appreciate that. We're going to go on to municipality with respect to finance, written by the Director of Finance, Ms. McCabe.
Thanks, Your Worship. Now I can speak to the financial impacts of the COVID pandemic on the city. There are a number of known financial impacts that we've seen so far. There's been staffing level reductions in various departments in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some have only been for a few weeks, but some of them are still in place. There are expected reductions in spending on the operations of the recreational buildings. There's also been additional expenses incurred to accommodate those employees who've been working from home, to accommodate the ability to conduct meetings electronically, as well as expected interest costs from reduced cash flows. So currently we are forecasting a net reduction in budget spending. The main driver of this is the fact that recreational facilities are subsidized operations, as we discussed earlier. So when it is possible to more accurately determine what this will look like, or what this does look like, I will bring that information to council. along with any recommendations on how to move forward. And also when we start the update for the long-term financial plan for next year in the coming months. So I do have some concerns about the utilities. There's been no reductions in spending because the utilities are an essential service. There have been several businesses closed, however, that would normally use these services, and it is staff's desire to aid these businesses where possible. So to that end, staff are reviewing the applicable bylaws to determine what assistance, if any, could be provided.
All right, thank you. That's awesome. Anything further, Ms. McCabe?
Nope, that's it. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, councillors, any comments or concerns for Ms. McCabe? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to ask that somebody put the motion on the table. So if somebody could read this, Councillor Rind. Unmute your mic. Thank you.
That the COVID-19 implications on the 2020 to 2024 financial plan report written by the Director of Finance dated April 30th, 2020 be received for information.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Any further discussion on Ms. McCabe respect to finance on COVID implications? Seeing none, I'll ask the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. That ends all the things that we will go, and then we will actually bring back updates on a monthly basis for the finance stuff so that we kind of have an idea of what's going on. And I think that way the community will understand where we're at, where we're going, and we as councillors will understand what's happening. So, Councillor Charlotte.
Yeah, I'm just curious, as we go into the 2021 budgeting process, I imagine this one's going to be quite a doozy. And we were talking last year through the process as well that we were going to be updating how we engage on the various different services. I remember having conversation about it, looking at service levels in the various different departments anyways. I think COVID's going to bring a big opportunity for this. And as we look for public engagement software of how we're going to be doing public hearings going forward, I would really hope to explore what that could mean for the budget discussions. I think we've got some big conversations to have as a community about where we want to spend our tax dollars and where we can cut and make some savings to help us get through these upcoming challenging years that I'm expecting. And I would hope to see that all incorporated as we develop that software piece and kind of go with it.
Ms. Lowe.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. Yeah, that is why we're doing the research and really looking into what we can use now and into the future and not grabbing the first thing that we can see. So we're really doing some good investigation on that.
Awesome, because yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there that of what we could do, but it really comes down to what do we need to do and how do we really serve the community and make it run better.
Yeah, the staff have been pretty diligent on working on a lot of those things and trying to be creative in how we move forward, both through recovery and both with savings for our residents in our community dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm really appreciative of all of those things and the way that they're looking for ideas. And so in upcoming days, we'll see different things come to council as we move forward, but also when we go into the budget deliberations, then we'll be able to kind of define how we engage. Anything further in this meeting that any councillors would like to put forward or any comments? Seeing none, thank you staff for your time, for all that you've done today. And I'm going to ask for a motion to terminate the meeting. Councillor Ryan, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All those in favor? Motion's carried. This meeting is now terminated. Thank you again for your time.